Guys, Türkiye cut off ties with Israel. First things first, let's get the name right. It's Türkiye and not Turkey. We 100% need to put respect on that name because I'm super proud of them. They earned every letter of it. And I just want to give you the story of Turkey because it's not an easy journey for them. They became the first country which is Muslim to slam the door shut on Israel. No trade, no airspace, nothing. And that right there means we got to do a full on Turkey appreciation video. And for those of you who want to immediately come for me and say, oh, they're still here and there in contact with Israel, I think we need to cut them some slack. We need to take into account that it's not easy to completely ban a country from doing trade or getting access to you. Like, that's not something you can do in 1 or 2 days. So there will be ways where this might still be going on, but inshallah, we have faith in them that they're gonna do the right thing and that they've done it with the right intention, and inshallah, more will follow. Okay, so first of all, I wanna say Viva Erdogan because he made it happen, okay? I need someone to tell me how to say it in Turkish because I need to say that in a lot of different languages. I gotta know, this man deserves credit. Please give credits where credit is due. And I'm gonna tell you today why it's not easy for Turkey to do this because this country has got the most problematic history with, I'm so sorry to say this, but the Sabbatean Jewish people who have done everything to infiltrate them. And that's what I want to talk about today, to also give you an idea about, how countries, different countries, not just Turkey, are suffering and struggling with groups of people who are deliberately infiltrating them and trying to bring them down from within. And so we're first going to talk about the Sabbatian. I've told you about Sabbationism, the Sabbatai Zevi sects, and we're going to talk about this disease, which also has affected Turkey. And so for Turkey to pull this off, what they've done is outstanding. And I need you to understand how deep this goes. And to know that, you need to know their history because their society has been infiltrated for centuries by secret Jewish sects. And I've talked about this before, who pretended to be Muslim. And so Turkey to now cut off ties when their entire elite is infiltrated still with these Jewish sects, families who are pretending to be Muslim is not nothing, okay? And I just want you to know that this Jewish sect, I've talked about this before, they run a playbook that's on a different level, and it's secretly been done, obviously, and these people are called the Donmei. So if you know anything about Jewish people in Turkish society, you should probably know this name as well. And they followed a man named Sabbatai Zevi. He was a self-declared Messiah, or he was a Messiah declared by Nathan of Gaza, whose whole brand, Sabbatai Zevi was all about mysticism, the black magic sect of Judaism. And, those had some wild and also very perverted rituals. And there's people who have written about this very extensively. Sholem is one of them. I've talked about him in my previous podcast. And so there's a connection with Gaza, like I just mentioned, because 350 years ago, Sabbatai Zevi was actually crowned the Jewish Messiah in Gaza by his hype man, Nathan of Gaza. So for this sect, Gaza is their spiritual birthplace, and that's crazy. And if you dig deep into it, you'll also see that Zionism itself, they feel like they were a continuation, or people were saying they were a continuation of what Sabbatai Zevi started. And even Theodor Herzl, the founder of Zionism, he wrote about that in his diary, but he said, I'm gonna finish it this time. And so last time I explained how the Ottoman Empire was taken down, and guess who played a role? The same Jewish families who pretended to be Muslim. They lived in Turkey, and this goes down to centuries ago. Like, this is something that's been happening for centuries, okay? And so they organized inside political movements like the Committee of Union and Progress in Turkey, which was pushed by the Young Turk Revolution, and this helped dismantle the caliphate. Like, that's pretty intense. And I actually got into this rabbit hole through Candace Owens. She investigated Sabbatai Zevi's followers, and later on, they became Jacob Frank. So Sabbatai Zevi's followers were later on organized, and they were following this guy named Jacob Frank. And that was this other Jewish messiah, and he infiltrated the Christian circles. So Sabbatai Zevi infiltrated the Muslim world, Jacob Frank infiltrated the Christian circles, and that's what Candace Owens obviously talks about, and her point was super wild because she mentioned how this tied into the Emmanuel Macron and his wife Brigitte story, saying this whole image connects to this sect because this sect had like obsessions with like committing like sin and like sexual promiscuity. Yeah, it's a crazy story, but you should check out her explanation if you want to know more about it, because that ties into what is happening right now with the elite in France. This sect basically believed that through sin comes salvation. So salvation comes not through holiness, but through sinful behavior. And it doesn't stop there. They especially target women in their theology. The divine is part masculine, part feminine. So they believe that their version of God is like part man, part woman, and that's why they push this idea of everything is like genderless, right? And they call this feminine side Shekinah. You might know a little bit about it if you're into it, but basically that's why they also push this idea, this sect, that women should be freeing themselves and rebelling against rules to chase their own happiness, even if it means walking out on your husband. It's like total chaos, but it's like disguised as liberation. And so one of these top scholars who dug into their practices is Gershom Scholem, and he describes how they even swept wives and celebrated festivals with full-on like orgies, like very just promiscuous behavior. And that's why they were expelled from Gaza centuries ago, because of this behavior. And you can read about this on their own websites, by the way. They talk about this, why they were expelled. I think there's this website called like the Jewish Archives, and there they talk about how they were expelled because they were doing erotic rituals. And they still celebrate Sabbatai Zevi. They still think he's an amazing man, and they also brag that history is gonna come full circle because Gaza, their old, place where they started all of this craziness, will be theirs again. That's how they view it. And that's kind of crazy, because if you have to do so many awful things to get back to a place where you were also doing awful things, I don't know if that's something you should be aspiring. So yeah. Okay, then we're going to talk about some of the Turkish leaders, because obviously they are playing a role in this. And I want to talk about Erdogan because I think, one of his biggest achievements is that he allowed women to wear hijabs again in universities. And so Erdogan, he's not just struggling right now to help Gaza be liberated through boycotting Israel, but he also did a lot for Turkey in general. For example, letting women wear hijabs again in university. And I mean, you can compare. And one thing that I think a lot of people like to forget is that Ataturk, he did go to a Jewish Donmei school. Like, a lot of people, they're saying like, oh, it's all hearsay, he wasn't Jewish. But like the fact that he went to one of those Donmei schools, I do think that says a lot. And also the fact that they were like so organized. They're gonna make all these schools and then infiltrate like the minds of the youngest people of a country. Like, I don't like that stuff. Like that to me is so calculated and it's so strategic, and it also shows that there's a bit of malicious intent, because like I'm pretty sure the parents wouldn't agree with it, not all parents, but then you still kind of like try to taint the minds of some young people who don't know what they're choosing for. Okay, anyways, that kind of reminds me of another story, by the way, the Gulen networks. I'm going to talk about that more because that's a whole rabbit hole I went down, and it was so shocking, okay? Because yeah, like that's a whole story. I don't know if you know anything about Turkish society, but then you probably know that. Okay, so in Turkey, the Donme, they created this curriculum where they were trying to modernize the country, obviously, and secularize it. And the Rockefellers, you know, they're pretty known for having done the same thing. They did it worldwide, controlling their curriculum, pushing people away from certain beliefs, and you know, Ataturk, he went through that pipeline of going to a Dolme school, and then he also changed the country, I wouldn't say for the good. And Erdogan, he reversed it. You know, he opened the doors. Women can go to school with their hijabs. Like he gave women their dignity, you know, and men can cover their heads if they want to. And they should, because, you know, our Muslim traditions are, you know, more beautiful than anything. And these reformers, they could never produce anything that's as beautiful as this. Okay, so then there's another thing that I like think a lot of people don't know, and that is that Erdogan also brought back the Hagia Sophia back to life as a mosque. I think a lot of people know what Hagia Sophia looks like. It's probably one of the most famous mosques of Turkey, if not the most famous. And during Ataturk's rule, he banned Muslims from praying there. Okay, like that's 1935. Like that's crazy. And so you have to understand the Hagia Sophia was conquered in 1453. When the Muslims, they conquered Constantinople, and they basically made it a church, they made it into a mosque. You know, the Muslims did that. And then what did Ataturk do? He actually stripped it of its prayers and he downgraded it to a museum. And so for decades, you couldn't even find a simple prayer room inside this mosque. Like that's how far they went to erase worship from, you know, this beautiful place. And then in 2020, Erdogan, he flipped the script and restored it to what it was always meant to be, a mosque. Alhamdulillah. And so I do want to give him a lot of credits for that. What made me laugh when I started getting into this story is that, you know, nobody other than a Turkish Nobel Prize winning author in literature, his name is Orhan Pamuk, he objected against Sophia Hagia, you know, the famous mosque in Istanbul, being used as a mosque again. I don't know if you know this, but the Nobel Prize is a highly Jewish prize. Like, I'm not gonna lie, okay? 22% of the winners have been Jewish, despite Jewish people compromising less than 0.2% of the world's population. And the thing is, like, I don't know this voluntarily. It's because I get a lot of hate messages, obviously, and this is something that I think a lot of Zionists comment on my content because they want to show me that we Muslims were not smart enough to get a Nobel Prize. But they Jewish, they are so incredibly smart, and so they do get Nobel Prizes. But let me tell you something interesting about the Nobel Prize. First of all, the founder of the Nobel Prize was also known as the Merchant of Death. The Merchant of Death. Like, why would someone have such an incredibly dark and terrifying name? Someone who sold death? Well, that's because Alfred Nobel was a Swedish chemist and inventor who created dynamite. And so CNBC mentioned in an article that he was named the Merchant of Death, and I could find it everywhere. And so that's the man behind the Nobel Prize that significantly favors Jewish people over Muslims in their awards. And he died in 1896. And as far as I could understand, since 1901, the Nobel Prize has been given out. He himself was not Jewish, but you can find in his story that Alfred Nobel, who invented the Nobel Prize, he wasn't Jewish, but his muse, who was 17 years younger and that he kept around for 18 years, she was Jewish. So what happened to her is, her name was Sophie Hess. She basically hooked up with Alfred Nobel from the Nobel Prize, and she kind of toyed him around because she got pregnant of another man. But he still paid for her. And she basically worked in a flower shop as an employee, but she had many wealthy clients. And at that time, Nobel was 43 years old. She was only 26 years old. And tell me this does not give Kash Patel. Like, I don't know about you, but when I read that she was so much more younger, she cheated on him but kept him around for money, I was like, this sounds like a plan. I'm not gonna lie. And then the fact that then the Nobel Prize significantly favors Jewish people over non-Jewish people, I was like, well, that's probably no coincidence. I guess a lot of people might be wondering, there's so many amazing Muslim people who do tons of great things. Why don't they win the Nobel Prize? Well, that's interesting because a lot of people in the Muslim world, well, several people in the Muslim world did win the Nobel Prize. But I just want you to know that you have to sing a certain tune, a melody, to be accepted into the club. And I'm going to give you some of my personal observations. Okay, so there's two authors specifically who have won the Nobel Prize for literature. And both of them, coincidentally, have written about homosexuality. And that made them eligible for the Nobel Prize. Like, isn't that funny? Like, in Turkey, it was this same guy who protested against the Sophia Hagia mosque becoming a mosque again, and that's Orhan Pamuk. And he played around with the idea that in the Ottoman Empire, there was a lot of gayness going on. And he obviously then deserved to get a Nobel Prize. And then the second author who won was, I personally read his book, by the way. It was one of three people in the Muslim world who won, and his name is Naguib Mahfouz. And lo and behold, in the 1950s, he started playing around with the idea that gayness was also present in Egypt, very conservative Egypt. What a gift to society. And he went to win the Nobel Prize for Literature as well. And so you have to understand, this was 75 years ago. Then we also have Malala Yousafzai, who is the poster child of Muslims are terrorists and they oppress women, and she also won a Nobel Prize. And she's currently joining Hillary Clinton in making a Broadway musical about how we Muslim women are oppressed. And then Malala, she won a Nobel Prize for peace, even though she refused to condemn Israel until 6 months after the genocide started because she was being pressured by Pakistan. Otherwise, I don't think she would have said anything. Wow, what a true advocate for peace. I totally understand why she won the Nobel Prize for Peace. Okay, so then a few others who have won a Nobel Prize for Peace. I think there's one guy, his name is Mohammed Yunus, Bangladeshi politician, and he's also facing a lot of charges involving corruption and fund embezzlement, and more than 100 other charges over labor law violations. So, I mean, that's amazing, right? So if I would switch my content today and I would just focus on something that would serve the Israeli agenda, like, I don't know, all Muslim men are violent, I probably could have a Nobel Prize for peace next year, because that's basically how it works, right? Okay, so anyways, I just felt that was so funny when I read this guy who's a Nobel Prize winner and then he started criticizing Turkey. I was like, yeah, that makes sense. And so, yeah, if you need other comparisons about non-Muslims, some of the serious nominations which have been accepted by the Nobel Committee is a nomination of Stalin, by the way, Joseph Stalin. And he was the Secretary General of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. And he was nominated for the Nobel Prize in Peace Prize. Nobel Peace Prize in 1945 and 1948 for his efforts to end World War. So he genocided. He basically took out millions of people, Muslim Tatars, and he killed at least 45 million Christians, according to this author named Antonio Socchi, but also Alexander Solzhenitsyn. He has written about him. Like, this guy has killed millions and millions of Christians and Muslims, and he did get a nomination that was seriously considered. And so, but yeah, he also ran a Jewish government, right? Because the majority of Bolsheviks were Jewish, but he still was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. So that's interesting. But when Hitler was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize, it was seen as a joke because nobody could take it seriously, and it was outrageous, and many people protested, and Hitler killed 11 million people, right? Including the 6 million Jews. So, like, that's a weird comparison. Like, Hitler could not be nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize, but Stalin, who killed tens of millions of Muslims and Christians, he could. So I don't really understand that. But then again, it does seem to be a prize that highly favors Jewish people. Anyways, the more you know, right? So other interesting winners of the Nobel Peace Prize were Fritz Haber, and he's also well known for helping to develop chlorine gas as a chemical weapon during World War I. And he also defended the use of gas warfare during his lifetime. And so in 2008, Gerhard Struhausen received the prize for physiology of medicine for his discovery of the HPV, which was linked to cervical cancer. But the problem was that AstraZeneca produced the HPV vaccines, and it also sponsored the Nobel Prize. How interesting. Two members on the panel that selected Hausen also had ties to AstraZeneca. Like, how corrupt is that? Anyways, then there's a bunch of other people, like, who are super, I would say, just suspicious, but like, I could just get into it, but it doesn't matter. What I can tell you, getting a Nobel Peace Prize shouldn't really be something you aspire if you look at the history of the Nobel Prize. Okay. Anyways, another thing that I think is very interesting to discuss is the coup d'etat which took place a few years ago in Turkey, and that was something where Erdogan had, loads and loads of his enemies come for him. And, this is a really clear proof that Erdogan has been dealing with a lot of challenges in Turkey, but that, not a lot of people know about that, I think. And so, okay, in 2016, when they committed the coup d'etat, they weren't just trying to kick him out of office, they were literally trying to kill him. And so on the 9th of July 15, tanks literally rolled through Istanbul, and soldiers, they stormed the AK party headquarters. Fighter jets were bombing the parliament in Ankara, and the top general, Hulusi Akar, was kidnapped by his own security detail. And even Istanbul's Ataturk airport was crawling with tanks. And so social media went dark. Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, they were all blocked. Soldiers were everywhere, like all the cities, and in Ankara they even stormed the state broadcaster TRT, and they made one of the anchors read this statement at gunpoint saying democracy was dead, and that Turkey was now under the Peace at Home Council. Meanwhile, helicopters bombed the hotel where Erdogan was staying, and 40 elite soldiers battled police in the region. Like, this is crazy. Like, this wasn't some small plot. Like, this was a major infiltration. But what people didn't expect is that thousands of Turkish people poured into the streets, and the coup forces shot at them, but they didn't back down. And so loyalist soldiers and police fought back, and by the time the sun rose, the coup was crushed. The cost was really heavy though, like 250 people were killed and over 2,000 were injured, and this was over the course of a few hours, so you can just imagine. And you know, the Turkey people had defeated tanks, jets, and traders, and this does bring us to our next point, and that is Fethullah Gulen. This is the wild part. Both parts in Turkey point to the same culprit behind the 2016 coup, and it was Fethullah Gulen. So basically, Erdogan's party and the opponents, they were like, no, this is the guy who did it, because he ran a shadow government inside Turkey, and not just inside Turkey, it was worldwide, okay? Honestly, I didn't know much about him, but like Turkey has been infiltrated with enemies for a long time. So the fact that they are now choosing to cut off ties with Israel is pretty big, because like they've been struggling, and I didn't know about this until recently. Like I was sitting at the Dubai Mall with a friend having a karak, and I told her about the Ahmadiyya. She's basically Turkish but Dutch born and raised, and I told her about the Ahmadiyya movement, you know, the whole fake messiah thing and the self-proclaimed Muslim reformer backed by Western imperialists with shady ties to Israel. And she goes, that's exactly like the Gulen movement. We have our own version of that. And I was like, what are you talking about? Like, I've never heard of this. And then she starts breaking it down to me, and like the scale of this, the money poured into this operation to basically take over Turkey is like insane, guys. They also branded themselves as the reformed, better version of Islam, and they are in the past few decades trying to take over Turkey with like secularized, friendly Islam, and it sounded exactly like Ahmadiyya. I was shocked, okay? The more I looked into it, the deeper the rabbit hole went, and this is what I found. Okay, so Fethullah Gulen, he was born in 1941, and he was a follower of Said Nursi. He died not too long ago, okay? So he lived and caused havoc for a long time. And so he was a follower of Said Nursi. Obviously, I also tried to research him, but, you know, this Said Nursi thing also has said preaching a few controversial things. But okay, let's not get into that. Let's focus on this Gulen guy. And so basically, they have their own website, and you can read about their own ideology on there, and they all reveal a lot of things, okay? It's not like they're trying to hide what this Gulen organization in Turkey is doing today, because they're present, okay? So first of all, the Gulen guy, he openly talks about favoring relations with Israel, okay? First of all, this Gulen guy, he openly talks on his website that he favors tight relationships with Israel, and he literally says like, tolerance, and it's about tolerance and dialogue with Jews, but he also admits it's because Israel has a lot of power and they punish you if you don't play nice. And so he's basically pushing people to be kind to them, but he's saying because we kind of should be afraid of them as well. And I mean, the fact that he also claims to be like this kind of like religious leader, that makes it like politics but not really religion, right? So like that's a bit weird. And I'm going to tell you also about why I'm saying that he is a sort of like religious person. He presents himself as a religious person. Okay, so first of all, they downplay the practice of wearing a scarf because they basically say it's an empty shell. It isn't love. There needs to be love and faith in your heart for Islam, but you don't have to wear a scarf. And so he kind of took it upon himself to make up certain religious rules and interpret the Quran and tell people, hey, you can take off your scarf, which I think is is not really his place to do, because he's like, it's all vibes, it's in your heart, forget the rules. I don't trust people like that. And then another thing is that, on his websites, it's also been said that they have like global infrastructure for school, charities, institutions, and they're all running outside of government control. And it looks like, maybe it is social work, but actually the reality is that it's like a parallel system. And, when a movement sets up its own worldwide network separate from state oversight, like they're like kind of like infiltrating the entire world with this different group of people, but they're saying like, oh, we're the people of Turkey. I mean, that's not helping kids, I feel like that's really about getting support from the West and also showing that, you basically are not tied to the Turkish government. And then, The Guardian actually published that this guy, Gulen, also had said that he called upon the people to basically get ready to take over Turkey. And there was the Turkish security service, they found this video where he was coaching his followers saying, you need to be ready to take over the state, like move quietly within the system, let nobody notice you, but once you're ready, make sure you're ready to take over the power centers. And that's not me saying that, like that's literally The Guardian who mentioned this. And after this, he basically fled to the US and he got permanent residency there at some point. And since May 2016, Turkey actually classifies his network as a terrorist organization under the name of FETO, the Fethullahist Terrorist Organization. And that's not just Turkey who does that. It's also the OIC, Pakistan, Northern Cyprus, and even the Gulf Cooperation Council. They all say it's a terrorist organization. Crazy. And like the reason why he was giving me like the Ahmadiyya vibes is because this guy also said that he has gotten like direct messages, I think from the Prophet ﷺ, that he should be celibate. So that's not a concept in Islam at all, but he did get that message that he shouldn't marry. And I don't like it when people start saying, oh, I'm like a prophet or something, I'm so special that I'm getting these prophetic messages, because like that's really dangerous if we are all gonna start saying these type of things. I mean, for all you know, it could have been a jinn. Like, who are you to know what is a prophetic message and what isn't? Like, we are not in the place to do that. So that was something that really surprised me, that he had a lot of followers, because that's like this guy from Ahmadiyya who also said, he was a messiah and he was getting messages, he was getting dreams. But it's like, who are you to know whether a dream is like directly from the Prophet, peace be upon him, or whether that's literally just your imagination? Like, you're not the all-knowing. So this organization is now deemed a terrorist organization in Turkey, and they were like running, they were like spreading. There's so many people supporting them that they could even commit a coup d'etat. And they obviously like Israel, and they now decided in Turkey that they're gonna boycott Israel. Like, that's crazy. Do you understand like how difficult that must have been for Turkey? Okay, so the thing is, this organization is called a terrorist organization, but obviously the US, the UK, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand, they do not call him that, because obviously they would just support him, right? And so, yeah, that's something I find very crazy. But then, then also this prophecy, he lived like a celibate clerk, and he was projecting this image of simplicity and modesty. And he claimed, the Prophet ﷺ came to him in a dream and told him not to marry. And that's just like the type of like self-mythology he used to make himself untouchable. Like, you're just on another level. You're getting direct messages from the Prophet. Like, that's weird. Don't do that. And he was basically, wrapping his personal choices in a prophecy, so his followers would treat him as divinely guided. Let's be honest. When you're saying stuff like that, you're making it seem like you're divinely guided, but you're not. Okay, anyways, then there's another thing which I think was so interesting. Like, there's a connection to him with Israel, but also the CIA, obviously. So, okay, this part became very obvious when he tried to get residency. So this guy, Fethullah Gulen, who is the opponent of Erdogan, he left Turkey and then tried to get residency in the US. And guess who backed him up? Several ex-CIA agents and prominent Jewish people. And then people are like, obviously, like, Turkish society is infiltrated with Jewish people. Like, this shows it. And so these prominent Jewish people, one of them is linked to AIPAC, who endorsed him. But two of them were ex-CIA. So one of us was Graham Fuller. He was a former CIA leader. He endorsed this guy, writing a letter to the government saying give him residency. But his daughter is actually married to a top Gulen official. Then another one is a former CIA, George Fidos. And then there's this Jewish American ambassador, Morton Abramovich. And then there's a rabbi, Arthur Schneier. He was like, a rabbi, I think, in the US. And then there was a pro-Israeli called Alan Makovsky. And he was a founder of a think tank, which was a spin-off of AIPAC. And that's crazy. And then I read articles by the Jewish United Fund saying we need to stick up for Gulen because they had such a warm relationship with him. And I'm like, guys, this is so suspicious. Like, why is this normal? Why are people still defending him? But then when you think about the history of Turkey being infiltrated by these followers of Sabbatai, Zevi, which is this Jewish sect who pretended to be Muslim, infiltrated Ottoman Empire and Turkish society. And then obviously now until this day, you'll still have these type of people like Gulen who have great relationships with Jewish people. And then finally, there's one more piece of evidence, by the way, which kind of makes it impossible to deny that this Gulen movement in Turkey was trying to bring down Turkey, Erdogan, his government. And this shows to me clearly that they are in bed with Israel. So for those of you who don't know, there's this foundation called the Michael and Susan Dell Foundation, and it's a very influential charity that builds pathways for all Israelis to access the upward mobility created by Israel's tech advancements and deep civil service. And this foundation directly supports the Gulen organization. And not just supports in words, no, with millions of dollars. And this is literally public information. Everyone likes to deny it, and they like to say, like, even if you ask ChatGPT or Gemini, they will say, no, it's anti-Semitism. But you can literally find the documents by the US State Department that show this. Okay, and I'm going to show you how I pieced this puzzle together. So according to Yale, I found this article that says the Harmony Public Schools, which are in the US, I don't know if they're also in other countries, but they're in the US, they're part of the Gulen schools source, okay? And the Harmony Public Schools have been funded by public and private entities since 2006. And they have gotten $14.5 million from founders such as the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, but also the Michael and Susan Dell Foundation. If the Michael and Susan Dell Foundation has it as its goal to support Israelis, then why are they also funding this Gulen organization? Like, that's something I don't understand. And, this is something, according to the US Department of Education, you can find it in their reports. And, it's funny because there's this Turkish website and they wrote an article saying, 180 million lira has been received by Michael and Susan Dell Foundation and the Gates Foundation. And this was in 2014. So now that would be $4.38 million. But at that time, it would have been more because there's been a major economic crisis in Turkey after 2016. And I'm not even done with this story because it gets worse. Okay, anyways. That money was already described in this article, and then people are saying, this organization is just anti-Semitic, but it's not, because you can find all these pieces of evidence in, documents by the US State Department for Education as well. Insane. Then finally, we're going to talk about America's wrath, because after the Jewish American Gulen organization didn't manage to overthrow Erdogan, they destroyed the Turkish economy. And this sounds a lot like a movie, but this is also public knowledge, because this is how it went down. Part of the fallout from the coup was that Turkey arrested an American suspect tied up in this mess, and his name was Pastor Andrew Brunson. And Turkey obviously arrested him because he seemed to be involved in this coup d'etat which was committed in Turkey. And then Washington wanted him back. Like, for what? Like, you care about your citizens? I don't remember that, but okay. And so Trump demanded personally his release. Like, how is that possible? Like, on what level is this regular pastor that Trump is advocating for his release? So Erdogan said, fine, if you want him back, then give us Fethullah Gulen. And what did the US say? They said, no deal. Imagine the loyalty to this guy. And to back their man, who must have been incredibly influential for the US, because the US wanted him back, you know? And so the US didn't get this pastor back because they didn't want to give this Fethullah Gulen guy to Turkey. So they were protecting both this pastor, both this Fethullah Gulen guy. And so what did Trump do? Trump literally destroyed the economy of Turkey. So to get their man back, Trump went nuclear on Turkey's economy. He literally tweeted this out. I have just authorized a doubling of tariffs on steel and aluminium, I'm so sorry, I don't know how to say that, with respect to Turkey, as their currency, the Turkish lira, slides rapidly downward against our very strong dollar. Aluminium will now be 20% and steel 50%. Our relationship with Turkey, he didn't say Turkey, he said Turkey, are not good at this time. So this event launched millions of Turkish people into poverty. For what? This Jewish-funded Gulen movement? Because they couldn't unalive Erdogan and his movement? Honestly, this story shocked me. The fact that even the Turkish economic crisis has been tied back to a person who is backed by Jewish people and ex-CIA, like, so they couldn't commit a coup d'etat. Then they wanted their American guy who was involved in the coup d'etat back to Washington. Then Turkey refused to do this, and then they crashed the economy of Turkey. Like, this shows how America destroys societies who dare to speak up when America, Jewish people, Israel try to infiltrate their society. And this story shocked me. Honestly, it really shocked me. And so this is it for today, guys. Like, I am honestly blown away by this entire rabbit hole that I went on, and I'm just shocked. And so I want you to really feel the pressure Erdogan has been under, to respect him, and also pray for this man, because he's literally, I think he's navigating a snake pit. Like, that's how I see it after I uncovered this whole, Sabbatai Zevi sect who infiltrated Turkish society with these crypto Jews pretending to be Muslims. They overtook Turkish society, tried to secularize it. Erdogan came, he tried to make it Muslim again. Then he faced this coup d'etat where these Americans were involved, these Jewish-backed Gulen movements seemed to be involved. And then when he tried to get this Fethullah guy to Turkey, the US just refused. They protected him like he was his own. And they said, you have to give back the pastor, which, Erdogan didn't want to do. And then they crashed the Turkish economy. I think this should tell you everything about the world that we live in currently. It's so difficult for Muslim countries to govern their own countries because they're infiltrated. That's all I wanted to say for today.